So Ayaka Takao is a Honolulu-based artist born in Kitakyushu, Japan in 1996. With an interest in media theory and child psychology, their practice has an emphasis in dismantling harmful hierarchies within art and our daily life practices. Influenced heavily by their migration and involuntary departure from their home country, they navigate the gray areas of our contemporary isms and boundaries of identity. Through their work, they hope to give others the confidence to pursue simple joys and embrace ambiguity in their lives and gender expression. They have received a handful of scholarships and grants that they cannot remember today, but Ayaka has also received their BFA in fiber art from the Maryland Institute College of Art and has shown, taught, and organized formal and DIY spaces all across the US and Hawaii. And it's a pleasure. Oh, and Ayaka is also my friend, so this is going to be like a nice tidbit.
Chat.
Yeah, chat. I mean, like, also part of the introduction, Ayaka and I joked that being both non-binary, if we like ran into each other fast enough, we would complete the binary together. So that's the pairing for today's talk. And with that, my first question for Ayaka is, what do you see your work being a lot about contemporary culture? How does nostalgia play into that dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, I think like with like the contemporary is changing all the time. And I think with someone who's like had really like, really specific moments of like, my timeline is kind of separated by like immigration or like those big life points. Like I think I kind of block in my time in the like I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but with nostalgia, a lot of it is like a lot of my iconography that I use is really readily like read and like recognizable to a lot of people of like East Asian descent. But then, with like a more Western audience, they don't read that readily. So I guess I try to play a lot with my own personal. I don't know. I don't think that answers your question.
It builds like a vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because even like, so I'm also the proud owner of the Ampa Man sculpture. I swooped that before the show even opened. Sorry to folks at home, but like I feel like it's fascinating how much of our newness today is affiliated with childhood. That's our past.
Yeah.
And I think that's what your work often brings up, which I think is fascinating. But like iconography wise, we've talked about this before, but playing with all of these like cultural symbols, what is your goal in reiterating them in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about, I think, cuteness in work and how it's, hi Ruby. I think cuteness a lot of times is read as like this unserious or I think especially with like bigger institutional art, it's like they kind of negate people who revert to or kind of look to like I guess cuteness or like childhood because they're like, oh, that's simple and that's what everyone does. But I think with that, like I'm trying really hard to I don't know, like I guess my biggest thing is I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I think a pleasure is a pleasure, and you should like what you like, without compartmentalizing all these different aspects of yourself. And so for me, like I think mainly the biggest objective with putting like all these different things on like one plane is I'm trying really hard to like really show all these different aspects of myself without like building like a hierarchy of like high or low culture. And so with using like symbols that are like readily recognizable by certain people, like, maybe they have an idea of like that's high or low culture. And then, it's like this format of painting, which, has a long history.
Long problematic history.
Yeah.
Well, it's also crazy how there's always this like an unspoken radicality to play.
Yes.
Like because in so many art spheres, you're told not to be cute, not to be submissive, not to be like mushy because no one will take you seriously.
Yeah.
But your work, abhorrently opposes that, and in fact takes it on more as like a empowering thing. How does play and that kind of innocence inform your interpretation of theory?
Yeah, I mean, I think like um backtrack, like academically, I was always like told I was a failure.
Mm-hmm.
So like I like did really bad in school and like, like was always told like you gotta get your am I allowed to curse? I was always told like you gotta get your shit together. But then, so I always believed that I was like stupid or dumb when in reality, like I'm so interested in so many different things. And like, I think the thing that drives me is like, I'm so like invested in the way things work and like the whys of why us as people like are motivated to do certain things. And so with that, like, especially with like media theory, like I think we, culturally, like we look at like popular culture as like low brow or like, for an example, like I love like discourse surrounding the Kardashians because I think it's like, people historically like have loved like monarchs and like royal families. And so I think they're our contemporary equivalent of a royal family. And just, I think once we're able to draw all these parallels to the past and now, we kind of are able to realize like, oh, like, you know, all these different classifications we've made for like what's like considered high or low culture, like they're all pretty arbitrary. It's like about like who's consuming that culture and like that can classify it as a certain way. Or like for me, like I love pop music. And I think a lot of people are really like, as someone who went to an art school, like it's like really cool to like be really cool,
and not like the popular things.
But like everyone's like, oh, like they don't make music like Beethoven or like the classics. I'm like, classical music was the pop music of those times, you know? So it's like things are popular for a reason. And I think we can build like a collective identity when we understand like why we like things as a collective. And like, I think at the end of the day, like my objective is like I want people to feel a lot more connected to other people, like in a way that maybe they wouldn't have considered. And I think like, being like wanting to be cool kind of takes away from that like collective identity we can share. But that's also like I grew up very Asian, like especially like I grew up very Japanese, so like that sense of collectivism is like very ingrained into my life. Whereas like, as like more of like an American person might not relate so much to that.
And we've talked about our obsession with cultural differences in Japan too, like how like a mangaka, someone who creates manga, is like the epitome of artistry in high society in Japan, where they're like, that's so different to America, where comic artists are like seen as like the lower grade or like something totally different. And just like, what is it? Accessibility and like intellectualism are not mutually exclusive. Like people could be smart, and just people like to believe that, oh, but only a few people are smart. So
I think the interesting thing about Japan is like they've kind of accepted that like commoner capitalism as their god. Whereas like in America, like we're so focused on like this like individualism, when like we're all kind of consuming the same things,
Yeah. I think also if anyone gets a chance, I would read the statements Ayaka left next to their work. Perfectly put, there's a caption about post-war uh, iconography culture right next to lyrics by RM as a poem. And I think that juxtaposition is perfect, where it recontextualizes pop culture in a more literary, analytic stance, I suppose. One other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, and not to pivot, but I personally, so being friends with Ayaka, seeing how they work, and I've always been so jealous and so amazed by how you just do it, and you will just sit and doodle and like have a drawing and be like, oh yeah, and then that's like frameable, and it's like it's great, it's amazing. I'm not that type of artist. I think there's two facets to art, where there's the people who just kind of let it flow, and then I'm very like, I need to know exactly what I'm making before I make it, and then I research and da 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 da. How does that come about? Is it like a muscle you develop, or is
it is a lot like going to the gym.
Yeah.
But mostly like I think when I was like pre undergrad, it was a lot easier for me to like make things pretty freely. And I never struggled with it until I went into undergrad, and they're like, I need a sketch, I need like a prototype, I need XYZ, and like, as someone who has sensitivities in some areas, I can't like draw out, or like a project can't get drawn out for me. Like it has the opposite effect for me, where I completely lose like interest in doing it. But it's a big process, like having to unlearn like what I learned in school. I mean, I learned a lot of amazing good things in school. I'm glad I went. But like one of the hardest things I found to unlearn when I was in undergrad was like this judgment of myself. So I was constantly kind of like wondering like, oh, am I lowbrow? Can I fit into highbrow spaces? Like, are people in these positions of power gonna like accept me and my work? And like at the time, I felt like that was a no. And so I was trying really hard to make work that could appeal to like a specific person. But by the time I graduated college, I was not working in a museum, not working in a gallery. I was like bartending 4 days a week and just like doing whatever the rest of the 3 days. And that life structure kind of like reminded me like there's no one path for anyone. Like what you're choosing in the moment is what you chose. And I mean that this is such a like answer, but like when I became more comfortable with myself and my like trusting that I'm making the decisions I need to be making, that's when just like drawing or just making without like being too like was it like planning it out too much, like that became a lot easier.
Yeah. I think it's like, I don't know how else to put it, where I'm just like, oh my god, I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous of like that capability. And it's definitely, like you said, like it's kind of like a muscle to use. In that same respect, for those, I'm just like saying all these minute details, but you also skate. And we've talked about how that culture has influenced your practice as well. And how like formerly in like the grounded contemporary sense, skaters are becoming these great philosophers in the art world. Like there's a lot of contemporary artists who skate and like talk about their relationship to place and just knowing motion and all of that informing their space. How do you consider that a type of research in a way?
Maybe, yeah. I think I've never thought about it that way. I think the main part of skating that I've adopted into like my art practice is like you're fucking up all the time. Like you're like falling, your knees are always busted open, but that's like normal to you. Whereas like, I think an average person, if they get a cut, they're like, oh my god, I have blood coming out. Like I need to take care of it immediately. But I mean, I don't know if it's like necessarily healthy, but I've like gone like 12 hours with my knees busted open, like not thinking about it because I'm just so focused on like trying to like learn a certain trick. That's like, it's like a bodily perseverance that's like, I think unlike a lot of other like experiences that I have. But it's also like something I'm not that great at, and it's really, I think for me at this point in my life where I'm like transitioning to my late 20s, it's really valuable for me to have something in my life that's a hobby that I'm allowed to be bad at. Because I think for a long time I was like, I have to be the best at everything I do. And you know, we're taught to like capitalize on every like hobby we do or everything that we're good at, when like you're allowed to like be bad at something. You're allowed to be like make mistakes, but I think we forget that. And so, and I, that all ties into like the way that I don't want people to like judge themselves and like create this hierarchy for like what's good or bad. Because when we do that, I think we lose ourselves really easily, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes total sense. Because even like the courage to jump into a drawing without, like, I don't know, for me it's always been like, I don't want to make something that's awful and and like waste this thing that I'm working on.
Yeah.
You know, but then there is that resilience of just like always being like, I'm just gonna try and draw this and see how it comes out. And there's so many times in the studio where you and like Leandra, who's sitting right over there outside of the camera, will be like, look at this, and I'm like, what is this? This is amazing, you know. And you're like, this is the first time I've drawn like Don Quixote without like a reference photo or something, and like so many great things come out of it.
Yeah,
too.
I think like something I've thought about a lot in the past 2 years is like making has become a lot easier for me and like a more joyful like practice when I realized I'm not taking up space in the world necessarily. I am merely like coexisting with everything. And once you like accept that, like, you know, like if like let's say you make a drawing and it's not that great, like that's not waste. You know, that's like you practicing to get to like a whole different thing. But I used to get super freaked out and I'm like, I'm wasting paper, I'm taking up space in the world, like I'm so useless, like I'm not a doctor. But when I like think about it, it's like, you know, everyone and everything is an ecosystem. And like once I was able to think about once I was able to think about like my practice as like, you know, like this, it's like a series of moments instead of like a series of like grand masterpieces. Like that's when it became a lot easier for me to just kind of like do it. But it takes a lot of time, and like you have to put in the hours to like definitely be able to do that. So I think, you know, I think you could, but like that's, I think it's fine that that's not how you operate either. Yeah.
Oh my god, I really hope it does change though. I mean, it's so. I had a question. No, wasn't that important. But I think like it's kind of, I think something that I want to point out that is very important for the way I see your practice and the way that I think is the most liberating is on all facets of it, it dismantles that hierarchy. You know what I mean? Like, because even within you creating work, you're not saying, oh, this is going to be my hierarchies, this is going to be my draft.
Yeah.
You kind of go into both fields and be like, yeah, whatever comes out, and the good work will be good work. You know, and like that, it's like all of this dismantling within even how you think about making that translates.
Yeah.
You know, and the product of it is so fun. Like I feel like every show that I've been to of yours, everybody they're just like loving like how much fun it looks like to make it. You know, and that like, I don't know, that's inspiring in its own right to be like, whoa, like this person had so much fun. And it's crazy to think about how we've come to this point in society where having fun is radical.
Yeah, it's
like
really weird.
It's so weird. It's so weird that like people, I buy your work because I'm like, oh, this gives me the joy that I would want in my life in some facet.
Yeah.
Right. And then I don't know. It's just sorry. I'm blabbering now.
No, I mean I think that's a very like skater way of operating too, where like I forgot what I was gonna say because that child started screaming. What were we talking about before this?
Fun, radical. It's weird to see fun nowadays.
Yeah, like you know, the thing a lot of people, like a lot of girls who are dating skaters, like the thing that is really like annoying about them is that they like kind of just do things at the drop of a hat, like whenever, however they want. And like that used to really bother me too. But like I think once I started like, you know, like living that lifestyle, like, you know, they think of something, or like if they want to do a trick but a piece of furniture needs to be moved, or like something needs to get like, you know, oh my god, sorry, kids screaming really distract me, but if something needs to be popped or something, they'll just like do it immediately without like judging, and there's so much trial and error, but it's like they see it all as like part of like their day, that, you know,
the limitations of like what not to do aren't there. I
mean, it definitely like gets them in trouble sometimes, and that's when like I go into mom mode and I'm like, y'all need to like stop it right there. But you know, it's like mostly like good values that I've learned from being in the environment.
Well, in that respect, we're sitting with Ayaka's work all behind us. If anyone was unsure of what pieces are actually by them in the show, they're right there. And like a lot of them are mixed media, and a lot of them are ready-made / sticker / drawing / painting, and the list could go on. Is there any point where you're like, maybe I shouldn't put this together, or you're just like, fuck it? Like,
there are some rules. Like I think if there's like, let's say I wanted to put a Pokemon card in my work, if it would benefit the piece more for me to draw that instead of like this like literal slapping it on, like that's like a moment I think about. But because of like my sculpture background, like I think if the object and the context of the object, or the materiality of the object, or like it's like historical kind of like cultural significance, like if that actually has something to do with the piece, then like it'll go in the piece. Like for like those boxes, I thrifted them initially, but they're like for somen noodles, you know, which they're like a really like famous export of like, you know, the area I'm from, and just like decisions like that I think are what I'm thinking about when, you know, there's all these different materials.
It's crazy to think it's like contradictory at the same time, where it's like it's liberating, but there are like some rules. It's like it's like a calculated improvisation where you're like, okay, that's still a really weird note to play, you know, in the overall song. But I mean,
with like I think with like jazz musicians, like they're like kind of freeballing it, but there is like a structure, but that structure helps guide them. So like for me, like I try to have a structure that like promotes like my ability to make things instead of like restricting. So I think how are we doing on time, Janice?
What? That was so fast.
25. Should we
flying by?
Last words before we open the floor?
We can open it up. Does anybody have questions right off the bat? Either Oh
here. Oh wait, you repeat.
I'll repeat.
When you prepare your materials, as you're a mixed media artist, do you ever find yourself grabbing from your own personal collection, or do you search for something when you think a piece needs something in particular, especially when it comes to things like stickers? Or is there a space for that like this?
So for the video, I'm always going to repeat everyone's question. So Alyssa asks, what do you go out seeking the materials for your compositions, or do you find that it's like, oh, I have this with me? Like, is it a specific sticker you're sorting after and all that kind of stuff?
Once in a while, I'll want something specific, but usually it's like I'll find ephemera like on the floor, or like there's a lot of like trash that ends up in my life, and like I've been very lucky to always work in an environment where like
it's good trash.
Good trash. I'm always around good trash.
Yeah.
And so that like I think that started off as like I have no money and I can't buy like surfaces, but then that slowly like evolved into like it liberated me from having to make these like really specific choices. So like I'll pick a thing for a specific reason, but I'm not necessarily seeking something out and like, you know, like scouring Craigslist for like a specific object, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. If it doesn't, you can tell me.
Okay. I kind of want to build off of that.
Yeah.
Do you think, because you said that you find yourself very lucky to surround yourself with all of these things that are usable in your life. Linking back to your Japanese American heritage of how Japan has a strong design, do you think that those sorts of things fall into place just because of your environment?
So the question is, because Japan as an aesthetic has such an emphasis of design in its like cultural appearance, does that play towards your influence in your work? Like aesthetically, do you think, how much does it influence you?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, the fruit. Oh my god,
that kid is having a wild time.
But yeah, that's like definitely the fruit flies of my work. But I think more so than that, like I think, and this is something I've kind of like started working from, but then I've like not walked away from, but like, you know, I've generated different reasons to make work. I started really focusing on my like grandfather and his house and like that his design sensibilities for that particular home. Around the time that like my grandma's health started declining. So a lot of it does have to do with like initially a lot of it had to do with like family or even like literal architectural like inspiration, is that the word? But then like visually structurally a lot of it does like follow like manga guidelines, just like, you know, things that I'm consuming, it it all ends up there. So there's some conscious decisions and some just like end up happening.
Great questions.
Yeah, great questions.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Can you talk about the use of like text and language in your work, and like are you been having that choice between
So Jada's question was, how does you see language play a role in your work as far as like symbols in the same way you use actual iconography, or how do you compose with language?
Yeah, that has two parts. Freshman year of college, I had a professor who was like, I hate text in work. And I was like, girl, like, it's not that big of a deal. But I think I do see it more as like the text itself, I see it more as like a formal thing. So not necessarily like obviously the text I'm writing and the words, like what those words mean, like do have value to me, but it's like the same as like a drawing, like it's like a design element. But you know, there's like text on this piece, but that's like a direct like tracing of like my grandmother's handwriting from when she used to write me like letters and send them to me in when I was in college. But it's like that specifically, I included it because she like was always misspelling things, and so like I think there's a lot of stuff that gets like lost in translation for me and like my family. So I think directly and indirectly, like I'm always like thinking about language in that sense, where like I think for like language is where things can begin for some people, but that's also like where a lot of like my understanding of my personal history and my own family, like that's where that ends. So all of those aspects kind of have to do with why there's text, if that makes sense. Did that answer your question? Okay.
This is a kind of an add-on to that, but I don't know, like also specifically like both speaking Japanese and English comparably. Japanese, the writing system was pictograms and aesthetically has a lot more going on within the representation of the word. Do you think that like dissolved a barrier between visual and linguistic means?
Yeah, I think that. But also like we grew up in the era of like emoticons.
That's true.
And like making text art. So like I think from there, like I was like heavily into MySpace, and I think like tangent, a lot of my color palette does like relate back to like scene emo culture, and like like the HTML structure of MySpace and like how you can like put sparkles on your page, like all of that. Like I think that kind of broke down like design rules for me at a very young age, and so I don't even remember what I was talking about anymore. Language, yeah. I think language, in a lot of ways, like we've evolved it to like have a different purpose than for what it's like directly like intended for.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Are there any questions?
I'll add on to that. We're speaking a lot about language, but I think you guys are both hosting this.
Oh yeah, thanks for coming.
But focusing on language and how you kind of like your art practice revolves kind of on like breaking free from like structures. I know like they use the word like compositions that refer to the work that we can see behind you guys. Like with your sculpture background, like you read these compositions kind of more like drawings or paintings or sculptures. We speak about how like language there guides.
So Luella's question was, how do you consider your work to be in the language of sculpture, drawing, painting? Do they coexist, or how would you define them? Because I use the term composition instead of drawings and paintings.
Yeah, I think of everything three-dimensionally. So I like even my edge treatment, I try to like paint like my edges like almost as intentionally as like the front, which some people who like are strictly painters, like they don't love that about my paintings, but at the end of the day, like unless it's on a flat screen computer situation, like it is like a three-dimensional object. So I think it is really important to consider like the context of like what like the work, like the surface that the work is on, and so like if I really want to paint a painting on canvas, I will, and if I really want to make a drawing on paper, I will. But a lot of times, like I'm also thinking about like the material that the image is going onto, and so like I think the sculpture background is like really like I think it's given me like an appreciation for materials in a way that I didn't before, because like in high school or middle school or elementary school, they just like, here's the paper, here's the colored pencils, figure it out. But when you like realize like oh, you can draw on wood, or like like if you paint on a glass surface, it looks like this. And then like everything has like some kind of cultural significance. And so that is what I'm considering when I'm thinking about material. Yeah.
Awesome.
Any other questions? No.
The thing that Dane mentioned he's jealous of, where you almost, so it sounds like you don't do your process work. It's just, am I understanding that correctly?
Or premeditated. Yeah.
Right. So everything we're seeing is kind of like you started with your final.
Yeah. Do you want to repeat?
I don't really know how to phrase that as a question.
Yeah,
That's
no, I can do better.
But do you start having no premeditation to your work? Do you consider just?
Do you start on your final?
Do you start at the end?
Yeah, there's like, I think I make a lot of drawings, and then like sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, I like the way that this is structured, so that will I guess that's my way of like kind of premeditating a painting. But if I mess up on something, I won't cover it up completely. Like I think it's less apparent in this body of work, I think, but like I think layers are like also a really important part of my practice. So, you know, in the base layer, like I'll hide some like Easter eggs of like images or text. And so like the person who's looking closely, like they'll be rewarded. Or like you'll be rewarded by like knowing that like I like messed up over there, or you know, like I think this might be a tangent, but like I think you can train yourself to make like a really amazing, like, I don't know how to describe what I'm trying to say actually. I think the thing about a lot of like, you know, historical like photoreal portraits I like is like there's something slightly off about them. And so I never want anything I make to like feel perfect. Like I think you know, like you can maybe see like the beginning and then like the path that it took for me to like get to a point where I stop working on something. But I don't want like it to seem like super obviously like finished, if that makes sense.
Okay, my question is your work, how would I phrase this? Your work leaves a lot up to the in the moment chance, and it results in this kind of like very funny enough when you say like the portraiture thing, I kind of get it, where it's like a lot of people go up to a piece and they're like, how did they make that? And then yours is like still has a mystery to it, but there's like you're like, oh, I know kind of can, if I look at it long enough, can develop the processes behind it. What, I guess, about that way of looking is essential to you, like the ability to look at a piece and be like, oh, this artist, you know, I can kind of dissect, and it's very honest. What role does honesty play in your work?
I think it's like, I think the way, I mean, maybe this will feel like a tangent, but I promise it's connected. Like the way that I treat social media too is like this very imperfect like portrait of like, you know, my day to day. And I think it's really like for me, like a lot of times I felt really discouraged when I would see work and I'm like, this is perfect. I'll never make a David with like, you know, marble stone structure. But it's maybe it's like I want to give the sense of like possibility. But I also like I want to give the viewer like, I don't know, permission to kind of see like this is kind of how it would be if I made it. Or even there, like I don't have any secrets when it comes to like my practice. Like, you know, if someone wants to like learn what I like, how I do things, and like, you know, like do things similarly, like I'm like always happy to facilitate that, because at the end of the day, like they're gonna do their own thing. Like Leandra, you know, like I think we share like a very similar like making philosophy, but they, like at the end of the day, like she's gonna do her own thing. But yeah, I think art has this history of being like inaccessible, but we have eyes and we're looking at stuff all the time, so it's like you know, I don't think it makes sense to make someone who's looking at your work feel distant, you know. But that's just like I think also my personality. Like I don't wanna. I want everyone to feel like they have a place in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. That's a perfect note to end on. Well, thank you very much,
thank you
Ayaka,
everyone. Like
for everything. If you enjoyed this talk, there's going to be more in the series for the show, right?
Yes.
Also, I'm going to take this opportunity to plug in as well. There is a AIR panel discussion happening next weekend, Sunday.
Yes.
Joy, our studio manager, will be on the panel along with Jenna Macy, our current artist in residence, Forrest, last name? Leonard, who is also a ceramic artist, and I'll be moderator for that too. So if you can come by for that, I'm sure that will be an interesting discussion as well. That's it, folks.
Thank you,
thank you so much.
Yeah. You can get up. I know your butts must be sore. Bye, camera.
Oh, we have to